asked for a trial, and therefore he was taken to Rome to be there under house arrest. And finally, from there, he was executed. He was beheaded. Poor people, people without a stable residence, considered to be a public nuisance, bore the brunt of what we would call casual administrative violence, as well as short-term imprisonment under local magistrates who just want to keep the peace. We must accept that Paul inhabited, as it sometimes is called, Paul inhabited a whippable body, one that could be hit or be locked away by the local authorities without too much of noise, with impunity. You could imprison people very easily for some kind of vague accusation like disorderly conduct. Paul's treatment was the same for many in ancient Rome, especially if you were poor, homeless, or of an ethnic group that marked him as a part of an occupied people. Which is to say, Paul looked a lot like those who get over-policed and thrown into jail today, not only in Kenya, but all over the world. And even today, many of our judicial systems contribute to the same. Some of our people will be thrown into prison for relatively minor violations, while others, especially for crimes that involve more than 10 million shilling, or those who have powerful friends, they will never make it to prison. You might have committed a heinous crime, but you will be able to escape prison unscathed. There is a saying that the law is the same for everybody, but not everybody is the same for the law. The church of Philippi provided resources to Paul, wanted to be with Paul during and after his incarceration. They wanted to meet his physical needs. They brought him to eat. They brought him clothing. They became like a social safety net. And the Philippians in that time sent a man called Epaphroditus to Paul to make sure that he had the means of surviving behind bars. And they wrote letters back and forth with Paul while he was in prison in that time. And they even prepared a guest room for him when he was finally released. These basic forms of support, sending visitors into prison, writing letters, opening our homes to people getting out of prison, are still basic needs, basic tasks that are needed today. Father Peter Kimani was involved in all this, and he could explain it much better than me. By the way, Holy Scripture doesn't make any attempt to prove the innocence of Paul as he is in prison, but rather his incarceration becomes like a place of special intimacy with Christ. Paul himself never exhibits any evidence that he is being pressured to explain about why he had to go to prison. He himself says, "I do not feel any need to defend myself, to elaborate on my innocence, or make a case for his own exemplarity." Paul ended up a number of times in prison. We would call him nowadays a repeat offender. And one can imagine the magistrate hearing about his past incarcerations, that the magistrate would be inclined to impose on him again a prison term. As it is said, once you have been in prison, there is a high chance that you will return there again. In fact, the imprisonment of Paul was accepted by his friends and followers as a routine case. It happened to so many. There were people who saw his incarceration as a kind of way of maintaining social power. It was not so much about being guilty or being innocent, but you were a victim of the game between the powerful forces. Rather than regarding Paul as a charity case or as a person to be corrected, the friends, the disciples of Paul, treated him as an imprisoned friend with a moral authority and a witness to the Christ who himself had been arrested, tried, tortured, found guilty, and executed. Christ himself, like Paul, was the victim of a system that was not able to provide any sense of real justice. Paul, like Christ, was just too poor, too outcast, too little friends high up. Remember, all this happened 2,000 years ago. But where are we today in terms of justice and prison system? Prisons, and that is also, I think, an experience of Father Kimani, prisons make people sick. And there are strikingly similar death-dealing dynamics in the prisons all over the world and also here in Kenya. Not only were ancient prisons places where disease can be rampant, but they were also places of hunger and scarcity, where prisoners were abused and their few rights left were trampled upon. And in prisons, and that is also the case in prisons in this day and age in Kenya, but also in many, many other countries, in prisons, many times suicide is considered a noble way out. And the suicide rate of people incarcerated in jails is therefore 3 times higher than the national average. Paul, being in prison, even being sick to the point of death, he presents it all to Christ. And he says, I want to do this for Christ. I want to be with him on the cross. That is the Christian way of interpreting it.